Uh, let's get on to it. For our top news story, apparently the perfect energy source is already here. The endless geothermal is poised for release from deep in the earth. Interesting. Technology. Why are Ukraine's cheap, slow drones so successful against Russian targets? In the environment, carbon negative plant opens in Turkey, turning LJ into biojet fuel and so much more. What's that about? And onto a material story, nanostructure combines copper, gold, and silver to give carbon capture and utilization a boost. In flight, NASA has released the first fully aligned image from the James Webb Space Telescope. In biology, getting bacteria and yeast to talk to one another, thanks to a nano translator. And Richard wants to know whether he can talk to everybody else through that. For humans, a startup is building a brain reading helmet that scans your brain in infrared. And on health, eternal youth is on the horizon. Cell therapy may reverse signs of aging throughout the body in just 7 months. Richard thinks he's going to live for another 7 months, and then what happens? So we'll talk about that. And Richard, what's our top story about? The perfect energy source is already here, geothermal, poised for release from deep in the earth.
Well, the energy source is here and it's so available, it's under our feet. And, it may be the other part of the story. You could look at it as the real part of the story is that we're finally getting something out of all the money that we're spending on the research and development for fusion power, and we're getting it a lot faster than we're going to get fusion power. And so this is the deal. To make fusion power go requires these wonderful high power lasers that are beyond the power of any that we ever had before. And it turns out that one of the things you can do with these powerful lasers is drill a hole in the earth. And what is useful about that is, 10 or 12 miles down, it's pretty hot. And it turns out it's hot enough to not just turn water into steam, but it's hot to turn water into supercritical steam, which has 10 times more energy than just steam. And so this is what the deal is. In the world, there are more than 8,000 coal-fired power plants that are going to become obsolete in the next 20 years. And each of these power plants has power lines coming to it. It has the infrastructure, and it also has this wonderful equipment and people trained to use it to turn hot water into electricity. And the generators don't care if the hot water came from a coal-fired heating plant or from the center of the earth. And so the deal is they're going to use these great high-powered lasers to drill a hole 10 or 15 miles deep into the planet near where the old coal-fired plant was, and then run the plant on this super heated water. And this is using existing resources and infrastructure that is going to be obsolete and thrown away, and um, continuing to get use out of the resources. And it's going to be a while before we are able to draw enough heat out of the center of the planet to change climate that way. So for all intents and human purposes, this will be infinite power for the rest of our existence once we got the hole drilled. So they are going to have working prototypes in 2 years, and they think the first major plant is going to be operational in 4 years. And so we will get our return from the investment in fusion power a lot faster than we're going to get fusion power, and we're going to get it from a way where nobody expected. The thing about it, when we keep developing these new technologies and new tools and new capabilities, sometimes there are uses for it that you never anticipated. And I think this was not a use that they thought they would get from the work they're doing on fusion power. But it looks like it's here. And if I knew how to invest in companies that were doing geothermal power, I think that would be the best investment you would make. It's very few things that I think have a chance to grow 100-fold or 1,000-fold in the next 10 years, but I think this is one.
Any thoughts?
Well, there's a matter of control, of course. I mean, everybody has known about this source for forever,
Yeah.
and
I don't know what happened.
it's a matter of can they control it once they got it. And also, why don't they just capture a crater? Would it be easier? The hole is already done.
In the Zoom.
Okay, there are a couple thoughts I have. First of all, these lasers may not be so transportable. If they're capable of drilling a hole 10, 15 miles deep, it's probably a pretty substantial piece of equipment.
I bet you're right.
So I don't know how practical it is to move them to the site of every coal generating electric place. Now, the second thing is, why aren't we already taking advantage of the geothermal power that is there near the surface? I mean, we have the geyser, Old Faithful. Surely there's geothermal power somewhere in the United States. So I don't know why we're not taking advantage of it. In Thailand and the Philippines. Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things that they make a point in the article is that you can, with the later technology, drill real deep and get water that is super critical. It's much hotter, and that the hotter water has 10 times the energy density as normal hot water, and that difference in energy density, they say, makes a big deal about it being able to be a productive source that can compete with the energy density of gasoline and fossil fuels.
Where's the water coming from?
The water is coming from the water you put in. So you would pipe water down, make it hot, and pipe it back up.
There's a shortage of water almost everywhere.
Well, presumably they would recover most of the water.
Right. That's a closed loop process.
Presumably.
Yeah.
But while the temperature of the water, say at Yosemite, is not super critical, it's still there. And why hasn't anybody taken advantage of it? As I say, Thailand and the Philippines both have geothermal energy driving generators. And are we doing this anywhere in the United States today?
I don't know much. No
It's being
place I
done.
know of.
Iceland is certainly taking advantage
Yes.
of the
Yep.
geothermal to a large extent, and I believe other places on the globe too. And there's something like heat pump that I know in Scandinavia help heat houses. You know, taking heat. You don't need to go very far down for that to happen, as the Earth just gets warmer and warmer as you get down. So it is being taken advantage on a much smaller scale.
Well, actually, a heat pump moves heat from one place to another. And a lot of air conditioners now are heat pumps in that they're reversible. So they can grab heat from outside your home and deliver it to inside your home, plus any energy that is contributed through friction. So they actually provide a lot of heat. It's just an air conditioner that's been turned around.
Right, but it's
Very
being
efficient.
used. So we are taking advantage to a smaller degree, but we are taking advantage of the fact that the further down you go, I can give you a quick example. We had a house in New Hampshire in the White Mountains. You need to get 5 feet down to get below the frost line, which also tells you that the further down you go, the more heat you can bring up.
So also they say one of the advantages of this is if you drill deep, then anywhere in the world you're going to find this same kind of thermal layer and same thermal power. So you can have a process that is transferable from one place to another in terms of what you do and how you do it. And so that to me sounds more practical than the approach where you have to figure out what the underground geology is. But anyway, we'll see. They're going to be experimenting and making real ones now in the next couple of years. And so we're going to have a chance to see how this works. To me, it's really exciting, and it's one of the things that is a kind of nonlinear change that can go online relatively rapidly, I believe, and actually make a difference.
So if we want to move on to coronavirus,
But before you leave this one, it's worth
Okay.
noting that this is being grossly oversold. In the,
Yes,
in the
yes.
1970s and 80s, the Russians drilled a conventional hole 12 kilometers deep on the Kola Peninsula. And you can look it up on Wikipedia under Kola. And they eventually stopped doing it because of problems they had when the temperatures were higher than 150 Celsius. And then the Germans did one in Bavaria that got to about 9 kilometers down and reached temperatures of 250 Celsius. And they had to abandon it because of the high temperatures. So
and here they're trying higher temperatures.
yeah, so it's not as easy as it looks. And I think what they've done in the article, they've failed to mention that the CEO of the company's name is Elmer Fudd, and they've spelled the name incorrectly in the article. It should be Quasi, Cwazy.
on our next story about technology, why is Ukraine so successful? Why do these cheap, slow drones do so much against Russian targets? Tell us.
Well,
It's my
okay, well, there'll be a moment for you, Keaton, before we're through. First, when I first saw this story, I put it in the technology area because I thought it was a technology story, drones and warfare and stuff like that. And part of the technology story, of course, is drones and things like this are actually changing the ways that wars are fought around the world. And war will never be the same. But as I looked at the story more closely, the drones that they're talking about now are these Turkish drones that are fairly inexpensive. They cost about $1 million each, so they're still not cheap. They're not 20 million or 50 million like the US Predator drone is, and they fly slow. What they're good at is they can just stay over an area where there are things like tanks and just wait around for the right moment and blast the tank with a rocket and then go back and get a new rocket and blast another tank. In terms of their maneuverability, though, they are described as having the maneuverability of a World War I aircraft, and that if there was any organized action against them, they would all be wiped out immediately. And the reason why I decided it wasn't a technology story is the story is the Russian military is so bad at this that these cheap, low power, slow flying drones are able to take out. One of the things that they're able to wipe out is anti-aircraft battalions. You know, those are the guns that are designed to shoot things out of the air. And I bet they could shoot a slow moving thing out of the air pretty well. But right now, the drones are winning those battles. And so the problem is not that warfare is changing and it's all these new things, but the problem is the Russians are doing such a bad job of fighting the war that I don't know, they're giving villains a bad name or something. And so the story is different than I thought, but it still has the components of these drones are changing things. The use of these Turkish drones earlier when Azerbaijan was dealing with an Armenian problem in the 2020s, they used the drones, these Turkish drones, to end a conflict that had been going on for many years. So the drones, in fact, do change the situation on the ground as they're used, and there is a new kind of warfare that should be underway. It's just that we're going to have to wait for the next war. This is not the war to show it. One other question with these drones is you've heard about the Russians and their wonderful capability of jamming radar systems and things like this. How come they're not using that against the drones? That would stop them from blowing up their cannons too. But I don't know what the Russians are doing.
Any thoughts?
Well, there's a group that is targeting Russia called Anonymous. It's a group of hackers.
Yes,
And
yes.
it's very possible that they have managed to destroy or intercept this Russian capability to be able to target these drones. I don't know if that's the case, but
Yes, certainly you're right. The system there is, these are the military systems, and the military systems ought to be more hardened against the hackers. And I know the air forces have been working on this issue about how do you nullify people's uh, systems to protect your targets on the ground and in the air. I know that because I was in intelligence in the 1960s. I think that was a while back, and we would regularly have missions flying in near Russian airspace, and one of the things they loved to do was to get fighters scrambled on our missions, and if the fighters got close and put their radar to lock in on our planes, then our equipment could lock in on their radar and our computers could figure out what their computers are doing and then fool them. And so that was 60 years ago, and I think it may have advanced some since then.
Any thoughts?
If anybody's interested in this, I would really recommend Thomas Puyol's article called Network Wars. And he says that Putin is fighting a 20th century war, and Zelensky's fighting a 21st century war. And he talks about all of the, as was mentioned, anonymous, and all of the hacking into the Russia's military and jamming it up, but all kinds of other things, preventing the Russian, like the ruble is now called the rubble because it's
Yes.
lost so much value. And he talks about all different aspects. Or Elon Musk, have you guys come across that with
Sure.
deploying his satellites? And somebody
Satellites,
said
right.
to him, what can people do because they don't have a license? And Musk's reply was they can shake their fists at the air. So this is, if Russia's trying to prevent information from coming in, there are other ways of getting it in the 21st century.
What was the author again?
Thomas, Tomas,
Yeah.
last name Puyo, Pueyo. So he came to prominence with his COVID articles in March 2020. His full name is Thomas Puyo Brochard. He is at that Spanish naming tradition, Spanish father, French mother. He has Spanish, French, and US citizenship. He's a data analyst, but he writes on all kinds of topics. Half of the articles are, you would find it on Uncharted, or if somebody would send you, John knows my email and Richard knows my email, or I could send it to Richard and Richard could send it out.
Sure.
He writes on Uncharted on many, many topics.
Thank you.
Susan is correct. The Starlink system is being used very effectively by the Ukrainians to communicate with each other, while, as previously noted, the Russian communications are being constantly intercepted by the Ukrainians, who even give back fake messages to confuse the Russians. Now, what you said about fighting a 20th century war against fighting a 21st century war, I think that the Russian forces were trained to counter an attack across the German plains by NATO. They weren't trained for the kind of warfare that's going on in Ukraine today. They had no idea what they were going into, in my opinion.
I think you're right.
Richard, our next story is also about Turkish carbon negative plants. Tell us about that. How can they turn LJ into fuel and so much more?
Well, this is actually Europe's first large-scale biorefinery. You've all heard of biorefineries. You haven't? Oh, I guess this is one of these new things. And what they are doing is, algae is real good about turning sunlight and other material into stuff and taking CO2 out of the air while they're doing it. And so here, this is a part of the new bioeconomy, and it's a refinery powered entirely by wind energy, and it's turning microalgae and into carbon negative jet fuel and feedstocks, supplements, and fertilizers. And uh, these are carbon negative because the algae absorbs CO2 out of the air like plants do, only much faster and much more efficiently. And uh, for example, uh, they will use algae to produce a jet fuel that has to have between 5 and 10% of fossil fuel added, I guess, to give it more power density. And this year, they will test this in powering actual aircraft. So you could have aircraft fuel that is mainly generated from carbon neutral algae, spiked up with a little bit of fossil fuel. The plant that they have is going to start off processing 1,200 tons of algae a year. I suspect we need a lot more algae grown each year to have much of a dent in the algae carbon in the atmosphere. But I still have, for several years, thought that one of the things that has enormous potential for the planet is algae because of their efficiency in taking CO2 out of the atmosphere and using photosynthesis to generate products. And here is a facility that is using it. Now, they also can use products from algae to do things like make fertilizer and in a natural way, and to remove phosphorus and nitrogen in some of these dead spots in the sea. And algae is, of course, eaten as a vegetable with things like pori and things like this. And the vegetables grown from algae are a lot more nutritious than food from grain, so they're potentially a good food source. And then there are also algae compounds are used as chelating agents to remove heavy chemicals from your blood, so they have medical purposes. And so there are many things that can be made from algae using sunlight and bioreactors. And here I like it that this plant too is powered by wind energy. How green can you get?
Any thoughts?
Well, one thing about algae is its photosynthesis process. And typically photosynthesis processes capture about 1% of the incoming solar energy in terms of converting it into carbohydrates. Now there's different kinds of photosynthesis, C3 and C4 photosynthesis people talk about, and sugarcane is a C4 synthesis, and it can capture 3% or so of the incoming solar energy. But what they don't tell you here is you'd still need massive, massive acreages of solar collecting area to convert at 1 or 2% to conversion into this algae that's going to be converted into fuel, even if you're using wind energy to run the refinery. So they don't really address that. The other issue about
They
algae,
did show it, by the way. They showed the bioreactors as being vertical, not horizontal. So they're using the vertical space and not just the horizontal space.
well, you'd still need acres and acres of it.
Sure, of course.
The other thing that they don't say is that it typically takes about 1,000 gallons of water to make 1 gallon of fuel. using algae. And they've been working on these algae conversion processes since 1945. And they're all theoretically possible, but they haven't been commercial, in part because of cheap fossil fuel. They were able to produce algae fuel at $33 a gallon or something. So, but it's news, it's nice, but it's nonsense to imagine that this is going to solve any problems.
I'd like to draw it to your attention, though, that with global warming, algae in the oceans is a problem in many areas. For example, on the Great Barrier Reef, algae is darkening the coral reefs to where they're dying. So if you had these plants located where there was excessive algae, it might serve two purposes: to create a fuel, but also to remove unwanted algae from the water.
You'd have to move an awful lot of water through to collect
Yep.
the amount of algae necessary to do anything.
Absolutely.
And Richard, in our next material story, what's this about a nanostructure that can combine copper, gold, and silver, giving carbon capture and utilization a big boost?
Well, it's one of these things that happens when things get small. If you look at it here, they've made a layer of 3 different materials with gold on the bottom, then a layer of silver, and then a stack of copper on top of it. And there is a flow they show where it starts with CO2 coming in, and as it crosses the gold silver layer, the CO2 converts into carbon monoxide, and then as it moves from the silver over the copper layer and starts to get charge transfers, electricity basically being added to it, then the atoms combine, they get some hydrogen. I don't know where they get the hydrogen from here, but at the end you have ethanol coming out. So you have a kind of nano catalyst arrangement that uses the catalytic properties of these different materials, and you have it combined, so there actually are several different reactions going through where you're taking something, making an intermediate product, and then changing that intermediate product to the end product. And it turns out that by changing the ratio of these different elements, they can tune it to make different kind of carbon products. So this version makes ethanol, they can tune it and make other products from it. And so again, you have CO2 in and some useful fuel out, and it's produced using electricity. I just hope they don't produce it using coal-fired electricity plants.
Any thoughts?
I can't imagine how they would do this at scale. Gold, palladium, these are expensive materials.
And
But you don't
CO2
need much.
density, well, the CO2 density in the air is so low, you'd have to pump a huge amount of air through the thing to recover any significant amount of CO2. And it's really, it's like artificial photosynthesis. And what you're doing is reversing the CO2 is produced by oxidizing carbon and it releases energy. So to reverse the reaction, you have to add energy into it.
Right.
And the energy you would add into it would typically be solar energy. And to convert CO2 into glucose, say, at perfect efficiency, the best you can do is about 26% of the available incoming energy that could be converted. And then again, there's all kinds of inefficiencies and energy transformations that would have to be overcome, aside from the fact that the incoming solar energy density is so low that it would take acres and acres and acres of solar energy to amount to anything. So it's a nice idea, but it's not going to be scalable to solve the problem.
Well, we'll see.
Exactly.
Again, it's easy at the beginning stages of these technologies to throw rocks at it, and you can always say, hey, this isn't proven at scale. And then what happens is they prove it at scale, and then you have to say something else. It doesn't have the efficiency. The thing is that out of all of these areas, we are working on many things from many different angles that are solutions to the problem. And, some of these things are going to work.
I agree with Richard because I worked as an engineer for many years. You didn't look at the things that were not possible before. You were looking at new things that could be possible. That's why they paid your salary as an engineer.
Well, all these things are possible at a lab scale and a theoretical scale, but they take decades to commercialize because of the problems involved in scaling them. So interesting news, that's for sure.
Well, something that has been scalable is NASA's first image from the James Webb Space Telescope. Tell us about that.
Well, I'll do more than tell you about it. I'll show it to you. And here we have what is purported to be the sharpest picture ever taken of a star. I can't really tell if it's sharp or not. All of those kind of things, the streaks around it, by the way, are all different galaxies. So if you notice in the field around the star, there are maybe a dozen or more different galaxies in the background. And, we've been talking about the web, and this is a case where they've been working on it for a while, and like Andrew said, it takes a while to get all of these details together. The web was first really conceived of about 20 years ago, and it's kind of a long-term big idea that they were able to do and was successful. And they started out 20 years ago planning to build the most powerful telescope that had ever been built. And based on these now early images that we're getting, they have to say that this design that they envisioned 20 years ago is going to deliver. And so last week, scientists completed the alignment phases, and this was a phase they called fine phasing. And what they were able to do is not only align all of the mirrors to get that sharp image of the star, the optical parameters were checked and tested, and everything was either as expected or better than expected. And with this performance beating specifications, they say, quote, "We now know that we have built the right telescope." Still, official operations are a couple of months away. There's still more work they have to do, but it's up, in place, aligned, and already taking images that are sharper and better than we've ever been able to do before.
Any thoughts?
Come on,
Hooray,
Daryl.
Canadian
We need
Space
you for this,
Agency.
Daryl.
No, Canadian Space Agency did the fine alignment.
Oh, good. All right.
Well, I'm waiting for the first big show picture. They say they're going to come out with something that's going to wow everybody.
Uh-huh.
And the one that, we saw the star alignment, the photo just now, and it's kind of nice to know everything's working, but I can't wait to see the first big wow picture.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Probably in June or July.
Okay.
Interesting. Well, Richard, what's this about bacteria and yeast talking to each other?
Well, I'm not sure what they have to say, but it turns out that not only do we talk to each other, but cells communicate with each other, and the cells use a language of chemistry. And it turns out that there are different, you might call them dialects in the different kingdoms. So bacteria and yeast speak different dialects, and they can't understand each other. And so one of the things that these mad scientists have been trying to figure out is how to communicate between different orders of cellular life. And they figure if they can figure out how to communicate with them, one of these days they'll be able to start to control them in different ways. And if they can control what cells do, who knows what they can do? You can certainly imagine implications in medicine and biological processes and things like this. And so cells send and receive chemical signals, and these regulate their behavior. And fungi use these chemical signals to mate, and human cells notify each other in case of threats. So there's all this communication going on, and they all use particles in different ways to communicate between the two different types of cells. So what these guys wanted to do was to, on a nanoscale, build some translating device so they could receive a chemical signal from one kind of cell and then transmit it to another kind of cell. And so they built their neurotransmitter with silica nanoparticles that are loaded with two molecules, one of which reacts with the glucose and the other reacts with a molecule called phleomycin. And the signaling system they developed has two steps, and the first step was they started a signal by exposing E. coli to lactose, and then the bacteria converted the lactose into glucose, which reacted with the nanotranslator, and then the device released the other chemical, another message compound, to a kind of yeast that was specially engineered to respond to this signal by fluorescent, by giving off a little light. So they could send a signal from the bacteria to the yeast and tell the yeast to generate light. That's why they would know that they were getting the signal. And so this is the first case where they have built a signaling system to signal between two different forms of microscopic life. And this is another thing that who knows what they will come of this, but the ability to influence living cells is a powerful one, and I'm sure that we will see more from this research.
Any thoughts?
Nobody wants to talk to their bacteria.
Well, it just shows that there's an awful lot that they still need to figure out in how cells communicate with one another, even within our own bodies. There's quite
Absolutely.
a learn. So,
Well, that's one of
maybe-
the reasons why I think that this century is really going to end up being the century of biology.
Now, if this is trying to understand how cells communicate, what's this about this helmet that can scan your brain?
Well, we have had brain-computer interfaces for a while now. Elon Musk has a company, Neuralink, that has maybe the best precision brain computer interface, but the Neuralink has the disadvantage of having a bunch of electrodes drilled through your skull into your brain, and I don't think that's a very user-friendly process. And so I think as long as that's the process, I'm unlikely to have a brain-computer interface. But what these guys did, they made a product that they call Flow, and it uses near infrared light to be able to get some kind of brain information out of it. And this is an adjustable headset with 52 modules stuck onto 4 plates on each side of the head. So it got all of these pieces on it. And each one has a laser surrounded by 6 detectors. And the laser is actually two lasers that emit light at different frequencies, and it detects these lights, and somehow the stuff detects some kind of information from the brain. I'm really fuzzy as to what kind of information it could receive this way, but they're using a process that is considered the best of the non-invasive optical brain imaging devices, and this is called a time domain functional near infrared spectroscopy, and this is the best way to do it. So far, the devices they've had have been high-cost, complex devices, and they're trying to make a device that can be affordable by normal people. And they say they're going to have prototypes available in a couple of years, and they have people testing them now. They're doing studies. They're studying the uses for these devices to detect emotions and to see attention span and other things like this. And as I say, they think they'll have something available maybe by 2024. They say the helmet is not quite as practical, they say, as wearing a smart watch or some other wearable, but they think they're going to be able to do something with it, and certainly having a brain computer interface that you don't have to stick electrodes through your skulls is a more user-friendly way to do it.
Sure is.
Any thoughts?
It'll be handy for police forces when they want to interrogate suspected criminals or even interrogate witnesses to events.
And here I thought it was going to be for disabled people.
That's right. That's
Kind of.
Maybe
and,
they'll get it later.
well, the
maybe
advantage of
use it as a
disabled
polygraph.
people is that you can do a lot of testing on them, and people are not as bothered by ethical rules.
Apologies, I have to leave for a dental appointment. Thanks so much. Bye.
Okay. See
Thank
you.
you, Susan.
Thank you for being here.
And for our last story, tell us about this cell therapy that reverses sign of aging. And all you have to do is spend 7 months doing it.
That's right. And it's a new therapy, and the initial work with mice say there's evidence that it could reverse the aging process, and it does it by turning back the cellular clock. And turning back the cellular clock seems to make the cells act young again. And it's being done by scientists at the Salk Institute, so it's not being done by a bunch of bozos. And they say, at least for rats, it is safe and effective. And it works by partially resetting the cells that impact skin and eyesight and muscles in the brain, and they think it can extend life and help people gain the ability to be more stress resistant and deal with injury and disease. Again, they've only tested it so far on mice, and the test is like they apply this to animals in the late stage of their life, and they treat them with this cellular rejuvenation therapy, and then they start to show signs of getting younger after 7 months of this treatment. So they have to live long enough to go through the treatment, of course. And there are more tests underway to determine whether this treatment only pauses the aging process or actually rolls it back. It would be exciting if they roll it back. Now, the basis for this is that all cells carry a molecular clock that records the passage of time, and by adding a mixture of 4 reprogramming modules known as the Yamanaka factors, the cells reset the clock back to their original pattern. Now, I had heard about these Yamanaka factors before. I'm still not sure what they're up to. But here they found that after 7 or 10 months, the mice resembled younger animals in terms of their appearance and ability, including gaining youthful skin and things like this. And what they say is by the end of the day, they want to bring resilience and functionality back to older cells so they're more resistant to stress, injury, and disease. And the study shows, at least for mice, there's a way to do this now. and that for the mice the technique is safe and effective. I hope it's the same for people, and these are one of these treatments that I hope they get it available before I'm too old to use it.
Any thoughts?
Well, the consequences socially could be incredible because it might work on some people, not in others. So it might work on you, and your children waiting for their inheritance have to change their plans, not to mention that you might see them get older and older while you stay young.
That's right. Well, it's good for me because I'm on Social Security and I can keep it forever.
That would be expensive.
There was an article in 2016 from the Salk Institute on this same subject, and they were talking about using T cells as part of the therapy. Now, I don't know what that means, but
Yeah, anyway, this was not the T cell stuff. This is a whole different approach.
but this has been going on, and the Salk people are a reputable outfit in La Jolla, so
Right,
they must know what they're talking about. They've been working at it for quite a while.
right. It's a big issue.
Richard, I think one of the interesting issues here, in terms of what Johanna said, is that there are some medical scientists who would disagree about this costing more. But because so much of our budget is spent on our declining health as we get older and older.
Uh-huh.
And what these things seem to be saying, it's not only about increasing lifespan, it's increasing health span.
Right,
So,
absolutely.
But if you're not sick, if you're really healthy and then die in just 1 or 2 days, it's a huge
Uh-huh.
saving for the budget. So we think that it's going to cost more, but many of the ones who've done projections on this say, in fact, it would be a huge saving if we allowed it for people to be healthier much longer.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
What I find puzzling is that they refer to skin, eyes, and so forth, but not the organs, liver, kidneys, and so forth, that I would consider more critical when it comes to health. I can live with lousy skin, but I think that I need my kidneys and you know, so forth. Those are the more vital. How about the heart? You know,
and I think that is being worked on right now at Harvard. Like these people are working on these things. Where it will go, we don't know. But some of these medical scientists are enormously positive about the changes that are coming down the line.
Yes. As I say, I just, my fear is that by the time they're here, I'll be too old and they won't be available in Mexico. And they'll cost too
no, but
much.
I think the impact on society is the more serious issue. I think that Fred's right. If you live the same time span to 90, let's say, but then died suddenly, that works well. But if you extend their lives till they're 120, you're going to have some serious problems in society. Already, we have problems with people that are, senior citizens, that there's too many in Japan to be supported by the people that are still working. And that's not uncommon. It's true in China as well.
It's a huge problem right now.
Yes. And this could just make it a lot worse.
Well, some of the people I've been listening to say it's going to make it better because we won't be sick nearly as long.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true? I don't know.
We'll see. We'll see.
Anyway, yeah. So thanks a lot, Richard. Thanks to everybody for participating, and we'll see you next week.
Right.
Thank you, everybody. Good to see you. And adios.
Yeah.
Adios.